Going to change gears, although I'm sure my next guest might want to say something about Ed Walters, because I saw she posted about him, and that's our friend, Liberal MHA Pam Parsons. Pam and I are going to talk about the budget from the justice perspective, but Pam, I saw you did post about Ed, so I'll give you a minute if you want to offer your thoughts.
Hi, good afternoon, Tim. Yes, saddened to hear this news today that Mr. Walters passing. When I was a journalist, Tim, and I got to do some stories that were relative to community food sharing, and of course that's how I met him, and our paths would cross now and then. And I got to say he is just a gentle, beautiful soul. And his contribution will be long-lasting. And my sincere condolences and prayers for peace and strength to his family and loved ones at this time. He certainly won't be forgotten, and so God rest his soul.
Well said, Pam. He indeed won't be forgotten. No easy transition here, but the budget, of course, was released last week. You have been advocating for all manner of reform within the justice system and investing in the justice system. Certainly there was some in there. The police officers, as we know, some for court services, but nothing for sheriffs. Your take on the budget from the portfolio you pay attention to, policing and the broader Justice Department?
Yes, you have to certainly where things are good, and to see that they've carried on some of the announcements that we've made. As you know, over the past several years, over $40 million from our administration, Liberal administration, was invested in justice and public safety. So it's good to see those things carry through. But a big one, as you mentioned, sheriff's officers. There was no mention of sheriff's officers or recruitment or retention initiatives for those. And also worth mentioning that sheriff's officers, of course, belong to NAPE, and NAPE is part of the working group that the Minister of Justice quickly, got together when we saw those closures across our courts for certain services across the entire province just back in this past November. And again, we do know, and I mean it's alluded to in the media, that we have some pretty heavy trials before us currently here in the province involving intimate partner violence. We know that there has been some delays. One of those cases has been delayed a year. Currently, the one that is currently ongoing, we knew there were delays, and every now and then there are delays, and it's due to lack of staffing in sheriff's officers. So that is a concern. They are essential to the court process, and it's concerning. And I'm actually surprised, not to see any mention of the sheriff's officers. I think it would be a no-brainer. But a big one too that I find that wasn't mentioned. There was no mention for ankle monitoring, or nothing allocated. It wasn't mentioned in the budget speech. I had the justice estimates that night, the Wednesday night following the budget. So we were in the legislature, I guess, till about 10 o'clock, of course, getting to ask questions line by line for the budget process for justice and public safety. And again, there was no mention of this. And I find that, again, surprising, because when the member for Harbour Main, who is currently now the Minister for Justice, when she was on this side of the House, on the opposition side, it was something that she called for. She presented petitions and every opportunity she got, and she even went as far as to say it's political will. You can make this happen. And as a matter of fact, I had a question. I put forth a petition today in the legislature calling for this, and I quoted the now minister to say, you said we were in the position to do it for political will, but now you certainly are. And again, there's no mention of it.
Let's just stop on ankle monitoring for a second. So because maybe not all of the listeners are familiar with why that's important and why an investment is important. What was the argument that the then opposition MP, now Minister of Justice, was making around ankle monitoring? What can you tell us about that?
Well, what I can tell you, when I was Minister for Women and Gender Equality, I struck a task force committee to ultimately end gender-based violence, and it involved a number of ministers and departments. And we had a number of stakeholders from community who I always say they are the experts. They know, they're on the front lines, they know what is needed, and they are in the best position to make recommendations to government about implementations. And one, I'll never forget this, it was a great presentation by Violence Prevention Avalon East. They came in, they were well researched, of course. They had their comparisons done across jurisdictions, in particular in Atlantic Canada, and where other jurisdictions have implemented ankle monitoring bracelets for those who are out on bail. It has made a difference. It has made a difference in the number of cases. It's a significant decrease in people, for victims who are the victims of intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So we know it works. And I mean, and even a cost analysis was done. And I mean, it can be done as little as about $15 a day, if I'm not mistaken. So it's something that can be done. But we do know, and based on what we do see, I mean, it's a tool that would save lives. So and community are still calling for this. I mean, we hear this quite frequently. So again, I'm disappointed to see that, though, that there was no mention, about this at all.
The other thing you questioned the minister about was the promise that you say was made. I don't have the blue book in front of me, so I will take you at your word, Pam, that they had made around opening the RCMP, reopening an RCMP detachment in Grand Bank. How did that discussion go with the Justice Minister?
Well, again, and this is something that we put forth in the estimates process. My colleague in Buren, Grand Bank, was also disappointed that the minister has no ability to open the RCMP detachment in Grand Bank, but it was mentioned in their election platform. It was one of the promises. And I mean, that's available online for people to go and refer to. But it was a promise made. And I mean, RCMP, as we know, I mean, it's a federal jurisdiction. But that said, the provincial government works hand in hand, and a lot of the salaries for the RCMP are both provincial and federal combined. So certainly, there is a relationship there. But and I mean, if you don't have the jurisdiction to make the promise, to deliver on that, I guess one would question why it was promised. But unfortunately, we're seeing that that's not going to happen with the RCMP detachment. But also, one other thing, Tim, another thing that both ministers, Minister Evans, who is now the current Minister for Women and Gender Equality, as well as Minister Conway Oppenheimer, who is Justice and Public Safety. Again, they were calling to declare intimate partner violence as an epidemic here in the province. And Tim, you and I know we've talked about the stats before.
We've talked about a lot.
In Labrador alone. Yeah, in Labrador alone, we have the highest deaths. Statistics are higher than the national average in the country for Indigenous women and girls who find themselves the victim of intimate partner violence, ultimately, and often in very unfortunate cases, resulting in death. So there was no mention of that being an epidemic or a crisis, or however you want to label it or title it. But this is something that they both called for. I think as early, actually, just as recent as this in this current setting, in the spring setting here, they were on their feet saying that this was going to happen, but there was no mention of it in this budget. And and I know that's a pretty good, I guess, a course that shows where the government's going, where the government's priorities are in a budget speech. And so those were very, very big things that were not mentioned. And again, I guess it goes back to my disappointment to see these portfolios lumped together. Women and Gender Equality is literally jammed in with Health Community Services, Indigenous Affairs Reconciliations, Labrador Affairs. So again, I mean, there is still that concern that these important portfolios and topics and stakeholders may not be getting the deserved and the needed attention that is required if we're going to make a difference.
All right. Well, I appreciate your perspective on the budget, Pam. We'll certainly invite the Justice Minister, Helen Conway Oppenheimer, to give her perspective, too. Thanks for the time today. Thank you for your words on Egg Walters. I'm sure his family and friends also appreciate that.
Thank you, Tim, and take good care.